guys, I'm Chris.
And I'm Mike.
And welcome back to the newly refabricated No Limits, the Thriller Podcast. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm great. And folks, you are only going to hear the Thriller Podcast from now on. We did a wrap on season 1 and season 2. The Mitch Rapp Pod and the Scot Harvath Pod are in the books, done and dusted. Feeling good, Chris.
You're feeling great. I'm excited to start this next chapter. I think, not being tied to a specific series is both liberating, but a little daunting. And exciting. I think, we obviously have been trying to juggle for the past 2-ish years, trying to have both these podcasts going at the same time. And some would go lay dormant for extended periods of time. And I think, now we can fully focus on what we want the next chapter of this to be. I think last month we celebrated our 5th year anniversary, right? We started this in 2020 of April 2020. I think we published our first episode in May of 2020. So 5 years. Could you imagine we would be around for 5 years?
Yeah, and over 200 episodes in, we might have cracked 250. I'll have to go back to the numbers.
Oh, it has to be. We're at 68 of the Thriller Pod. We're at 70
something on Scot Harvath. 65, I think.
65 on Scot Harvath, and then 200 plus on.
Yeah. So we're zooming in on 300. Any one of these months that could be coming. So big changes, but I think I'm excited about this for the reasons you said. And also, Thriller Pod has been a lot of fun bouncing around. We pulled in a Nelson DeMille book a little while back. We love when a new McCloskey drops. Chris Howdy for a while was going strong, and he's going to have a new book this year, the JFK Conspiracy.
Oh, I don't know super excited about that one.
Yeah, I mean, a little upsetting. There's no Haley Chill. She's been dormant for a bit.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is we get to go to all these different authors, really, have a wide array of books. Jack Carr, right? We can do the TV show coming out soon. It's just going to be really exciting to jump around. While it's been great to do an entire series, and we kind of gotten into our groove on Scot Harvath the last few months. We were pumping out 2-3 Scot Harvath books a month.
Yeah, we just locked in.
It was a blast, and that was maybe the best stretch of books as well, because we did Spy Master and Backlash, Black Ice, Near Dark, all the more recent books. So that was awesome. But this pod, Thriller Pod, will give us some diversity, and we'll get to keep up with the new releases. Our main goal for the rest of 2025 is to use the Thriller Pod to cover new releases the month they come out.
Sure.
So continuing to bring you author interviews as those new releases come out. That's a little harder logistically, but we definitely want to keep that going. But we're just two guys sharing our feedback, sharing our thoughts on books, almost like the book club after party or the after pod. I know I walk out of a movie and I just want to go search for a couple of different podcasts I listen to get their thoughts. Same with TV shows. We also want to keep that going for books. For those of you who love thrillers, close a book, want you to have somebody to talk about it with, just like a buddy, sitting around the campfire, grabbing a few beers on the golf course, talking books. So, Chris, that's natural for you and I.
Yeah. We just celebrated a nice day together. I got to spend the evening with your family. Went to a nice dinner. Played a nice round of golf with our buddies. Our annual. It's been pretty much annual now for, I don't know, 6, 7. We were trying to figure out the years. It's at least 5. It might be 8, somewhere between those. This annual golf trip we take together in April. Yeah, it's great. I really look forward to this podcast every week. It's funny because sometimes, mainly just because of life, gets in the way, and I'm like, oh, I gotta pop. But then, as soon as I get on and I hit record, I'm just locked in, and I'm excited about it. And I'm excited to talk to you guys. I'm excited to talk to you. I'm excited to, obviously all of our patrons, our communications on GroupMe. It's great. I live for this. So.
Yeah, and speaking of locking in, let's just tell the people what we're getting to today. Steve Berry.
You've been talking about it for a long time, that I would love it.
Yep.
And we locked it in.
Yep. The Templar Legacy, the first book in the Cotton Malone series. Not Steve Berry's first book. He wrote a few standalones, at least 3.
I think 3,
yeah. Yeah, before the Templar Legacy. But Chris, from the moment in the Scot Harvath series where you were jiving with all the little history tidbits and the way he can embed, whether it's Jefferson or some other historical time period into the plots, I knew you would love Steve Barry. And I, unfortunately, he kind of fell to the back burner for me, just getting into the Mitch Rapp stuff, the Scot Harvath stuff. He wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I picked up this book and I'm all in again because growing up, I guess like my teenage years, I read every one of his books, the new releases. I looked forward to them coming out. It almost for a while was just like Mitch Rapp, where I needed that book. I looked forward to it. I always wanted to see the next thing. And a big part of that, I was a history guy in high school, history major in college. So I was just absolutely jiving with Steve Barry. Then I would say a decade plus went by where I didn't keep up with him. I didn't read the books. This one absolutely wants me to go back and get back on the train. And what's cool about them, each Steve Barry book has a different historical backdrop, as I'm sure you could tell from this one, right? This one, the Knights Templar, the 12th and 13th centuries. Every book has that historical backdrop, but they're all different. There's one about Columbus. There's one about Lincoln, uh, the Elizabethan era, Queen Victoria as well. There's even one on Mormons, one on MLK. He does everything. Ancient history. There's a lot of like Russian stuff as well in his early books, if I remember. He just runs the gamut on doing faction, the Brad Thor style faction. And in some ways, he does it better. It's different. So I don't think we can say they're one to one. But Steve Barry's edge, I feel like, is it's not just a random nugget here or there and the characters pass by a place. The history is unfolding at the same time as the current timeline. So the plot with the main characters is driven by these interspersed chapters hundreds of years ago, maybe, a different time period. And the events there are playing out and intertwining with the events in the current day. And to me, that's like a little extra than what Brad would do with the history. Steve Barry just actually writes the different time periods so well, where Brad Thor only did that a handful of times.
I think this is, akin to, one of my favorite authors, Dan Brown. Very similar to movies like National Treasure or, Da Vinci Code. Obviously, they're just they obviously take at least with this one. This is my first time diving into it. It takes a historical time point, some sort of idea. This one being the Knights Templar and their legacy, and then what is he gonna take from it? And I love at the very end the sort of the author's coda, and sometimes we would get that with Brad, and more so on his attempts when he would try to do something like this. I think the one that most comes to mind is his the Thomas Jefferson story with what was that, The Last Patriot.
The Last Patriot, yep, exactly.
Where we kind of you have to have like a exposition at the end because you're giving a lot of ideas and you want to sort of state what is fact and what is fiction. And I love that he puts references, like he states where he gets a lot of his research. Ultimately, he has to have some sort of thing that he adds at the very end, which takes it from fact to whatever the fiction. You can jive with that or not. You can disagree, but I like that. I think it's the same thing with all of I think of the Da Vinci Code, which is sort of similar premise, right? Talking about the Knights Templar, Holy Grail, Christ.
Yep, exactly.
That sort of takes a different route in that sense. But these are works of fiction. They're fun. They're intriguing. They get you thinking. I think, but I love it. Just makes me want to learn more about these. Like that's what I loved about Brad, right? Going into the history of these certain locations, oftentimes it was, setting based, talking about a building or talking about, an event that took place, in Russian history or Chinese history or whatever. And it would just make me want to then start my Google search and, I'm scrolling and I'm clicking and I'm sort of getting immersed in that, like whatever Brad, like I'm assuming I'm doing like very similar research to what Brad did, at least, an inch deep. And this just makes me want to go even more. Like now I want to read like that one, all of his primary literature that he cited at the end. I would love to go and read, and he even cites a movie. I would love to watch that movie too. So,
And I love how, like you're saying, Steve Barry, I just feel like more thoroughly brings in that source material. Like the book that he read, let's say the pictures of the tombstones in this one, look, it's a real book, and he's having the characters have a bidding war of, at an auction over it, and then assassins willing to kill for it. The source material is brought in just like the settings are brought in. I feel like that's the closest one-to-one with Brad is when he's describing a castle, in the south of France and all this stuff. It's like Brad could do that just as well. But something about the way Steve Barry, the whole history envelops the plot, and it's not just a side story. It's the main driver, and that's, he finds these mysteries. It's also what you choose to write and what I'm sure personally interests him. Every one of his books is just one of these mysteries, or there's something odd about the archaeological record or the historical record. These bizarre pieces just don't seem to fit, and then he makes up a story that fills that gap. And like you said, it could be very controversial. Actually, I would say all of his books are controversial to someone, some on a grander scale than others, because history is incomplete. And once you start putting a story in and fiction in, and it's a Pandora's box. You can go so many different ways. You can open so many different avenues. You can just make stuff up, of course. But to tell a good story while doing that balances the fact and the fiction, the faction. Steve Barry, Brad Thor, two of the best. You said Dan Brown. Steve Barry is almost the best parts of Dan Brown mixed with the best parts of Brad Thor. And who doesn't want that?
Yeah, because he tends to, some of Dan Brown's novels has like the suspense and like guns and intrigue, but this one way more had the political spy background because of how Steve Barry decided to make Cotton Malone as
Cotton
a
Malone.
character.
Right.
You're very correct in that it's very much so almost a perfect blend of Scot Harvath and Robert Langdon from the Dan Brown series. Like it's instead of a professor and versus a a career Secret Service CIA type guy, you have this
lawyer
intellect,
lawyer agent,
who was a part of this covert Magellan. What was it?
Magellan billet.
Billet. Yeah. Like
completely made up. I want to ask you though, like, how do you feel about this? Is a Department of Justice lawyer, right? And his boss,
right,
is a high up in the Department of
She's
Justice.
a career DOJ, like
right. Yet they have this almost secret ops style agency charged with hunting down mysteries and
with a gun.
cases.
He's obviously good with obviously he's very capable in the field.
Sure, yeah, and that's the whole billet. So it's like, I don't know how much I believe that at first. And it's kind of weird, and you just brought up that Steve Barry is a lawyer by trade.
Right.
And
yeah, I was just looking at his bio. He's a 30-year lawyer.
Yeah, so I guess that's him putting a little bit of himself into it. I think it's a different take. It's also like how Daniel Silva has Gabriel Alon be this art restorer, but also an assassin in the shadows. Why not do that with a lawyer, someone in DOJ? Maybe you can do certain missions that are basically you're not going to assign to the Army, to Delta. You're not going to assign them to, the SEALs. It's not kind of like these like military ops, but you need a team to go solve problems, hunt down clues, tail people, have lawyers out in the field doing that. Like, that's wild. And maybe they can also tie up loose ends or read, the operating field from a legal perspective so that they're also talking to the right people, leaving the right or wrong clues, cleaning up what needs to be cleaned up before it has to go to a court, and then everything's out in the open. So if you have like trained lawyer agents who can see through that legal lens, or a Stephanie Nell who can direct the mission, I think that's really creative. Like, you can preclude a lot of legal battles and legal hurdles that could come up because your guys downrange in the field are cleaning all that up before it even gets that far.
it almost feels like they're FBI agents to me. I mean, the FBI is like
Yeah.
part of the Department of Justice. They are, typically most of the people there are lawyers, unlike the CIA, who, doesn't take lawyers. Like they take, the analysts there are different kinds of people, right?
Or like an ATF. It's like an ATF, FBI.
Sure. Yeah. I just get the sense that he's very capable. But I just thought it was very interesting that, like, for your first novel, you're gonna set this guy up in retirement.
Yeah.
Like, after all this, and we have to buy in very quickly that we believe this guy, the fact that his previous mentor is, like one of the main protagonists in this entire story is like insane. And I know it's like the first novel, you got to have it. I really am interested to see like how this all plays out in the next couple ones. I made the mistake of I guess not a mistake, but I went on Goodreads and they have like they have a order of chronology. So and I was like, oh wait, are we supposed to be reading this one because this one says first? So eventually he goes back, one of the more recent ones, like 2018, and writes a book before the Templar Legacy.
Yeah, no, we get younger Cotton Malone and a lot more, years later, books later. So I did want to ask you about that. One, how'd you feel about him being a lawyer and this Magellan billet? Was it believable? Kind of talked about that. But the other one is, what do you think about the cast of characters? Because I honestly forgot that this many major players are introduced so early. And I didn't want to blow anything about, who dies and whatnot. So I didn't text you while we were reading. But let me tell you, Stephanie Nell, Henrik Torvaldsson, and Cassiopeia Witt are major players in this universe. Like,
and like they're to come. Like,
dude, they're the big ones. So I was gonna text you mid reading the book. You told me you got to Cassiopeia. I was like, fucking love Cassiopeia Witt. She's like one of the best female characters you'll ever read. And then I thought that might tip you off to like, oh, she's around then, she doesn't die. But dude, Cassiopeia Witt is awesome. And there's even a spin-off series. I haven't read any of them, but I think he and MJ Rose, a female author, they co-authored some books together, and I think she might have even taken a few on her own. But there's a whole Cassiopeia Witt kind of line out there.
No, she's super intriguing character.
Yep. And then Henrik Torvaldsson is like, I mean, he's like a Reed Carlton, but from this like art dealing business, and he's got all this money, and he's just interested in history. It's like you have an old man character already. You can think of Stephanie Nell also as like an Irene Kennedy, someone running the agents in the field. And then you have Cassiopeia Witt, the sidekick and potential maybe even kind of love interest.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on that.
We've established all of this in the first book. I forgot about that. So I wanted to get your take on what do you think about this whole crew?
No, I think you did a great job of setting up and giving us intriguing characters. And no one was probably the only one that I was like just not confused about, but just like the fact that Stephanie now, like her son, but at some point you have to give a suspension of disbelief because he's making a plot, like he's coming up with a story. So like, all right,
and big reveal too.
That is what it is. Oh yeah, I knew something was up with the seneschal,
the accent,
because of the. And again, this is where audiobooks sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes can, I don't want to say mislead, give away things that if you were reading the book, you would have no idea.
Yeah. But even listening, you might not pick up on it. Like that's a very trained ear you have to put that together.
I guess because I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I'm trained to like pick up on that. But the fact, as soon as he started talking,
he was like
American. Yeah. I knew, because every other character in the Abbey was French.
Yep.
Like I was like, oh, something's up with this. Like, so it perked my ears as soon as I heard it. So
I bet you wouldn't have guessed it was the son though, because they mentioned in passing that he died in the avalanche.
No, I
hung himself. Yeah.
I didn't suspect that it was Although well, actually, I thought that the son was killed by the Templars. Like I thought that
Right.
him and his father were
both killed. Yeah.
targeted.
Yeah.
Super cool reveal. The fact that the master was following him, saved him, brought him in. But yeah, no. But as soon as I heard that the Seneschal's voice was American,
Yep.
and maybe not the first chapter, but the second chapter, it was just so distinctive because he's talking to all of these people with French accents.
The master, Jeffrey, yeah. De Beaufort or
De Roquefort, yeah.
De Roquefort, yep.
Like
Good villain.
It stood out.
Villain.
Oh,
great villain.
Great villain because he's like super flawed,
yeah,
but super determined, and I don't know, like, but at the same time, like he kind of had a point, like like you can kind of understand his motives, like a little bit, like he wants to get this
the glory,
right, exactly.
Bring back the trust of the Brotherhood, restore their image, like usher in this, great wave, the golden age, essentially, of the Templars since their downfall under whichever pope it was, Clement, who went after them, and the French king he was in bed with. Like, this is a 700-year-old mission, undercover mission that's been hiding out, that they've got a bad rep ever since the Inquisition, when basically they were tortured and had to give false confessions of, spitting on the cross and denying Christ and being heretics. He can like undo 700 years of history that's just weighed on him and his brothers and the rule. And the people are behind him. When he's whipping up a crowd, I'm like thinking all the times in history where, the crowd was fickle and good orators who had a strong man kind of vibe were able to convince others to follow their will, even if it was not the right thing to do, wasn't the moral thing to do, but you could hoodwink people through words and rhetoric. And man, does he come on
back
strong.
To the time of Jesus. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, fair, but he was unbelievably creepy and persuasive to the brothers in the conclave in the Abbey, but he was also creepy out in the field when he was running his agents and getting his guys to do things and ultimately getting his hands dirty himself. He played a lot of roles and popped up a lot, and I'm happy about that. We had a few villains in some books that are supposed to be this big bad that scare you, but they're just pulling strings in the background. You see him a chapter in the beginning, a chapter in the middle, a chapter at the end.
We were with the villain like quite a bit of book time. And this is a very long book.
It is.
I crushed it though. Like, to be honest, like this is one of those books. I definitely do this with the Dan Brown books where like it is such a page turner. Like I cannot I gotta listen to it.
One too many little mysteries though. One too many little clues and puzzle pieces to put together, would you say?
So you're getting to like my picking the nits section, I guess. Sure. The whole 7-9 dates, like how they ultimately solved the puzzle to get where they needed to go. I was racking my brain. Like you really had to, I actually like went back multiple times, like I was pressing, back 30 seconds a couple of times just to re-listen because it was super complicated.
Yeah, it was.
And I'm hoping that it's just like a first book, type thing, that not all of his stories are going to be this complicated.
Yeah.
To be able to solve yourself.
They're not all this complicated, and he does tighten up, but I will say the intricate details of like all these little clues from history, like that stays the same. But yeah, I will say overall it tightens up where it's a little easier to follow, how you get from A to B to C to X,
When you think about it, sure. And you go back and like I reread that one section where like it's the section where Cotton Malone like wakes up in the middle of the night, right? Like right after he has the dream, and he like essentially solves the mystery.
Yeah.
And it explains it all, and we get the exposition explaining it all. I listened to that like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Once I like reread that, like, yeah, it made sense. Everything that he laid out, we could have pieced it together ourselves. But it was a lot. And I think that but eventually after that, I just didn't care. Like, all right, cool. Like let's go to the ruins and let's see what's down there.
You kind of
I
roll with
just
it.
wanted to
Yep.
know. I wanted to know, and I should preface this that I'm a devout Catholic, like, and I believe certain things, but I've always been, you know, I say I went to the Catholic University of America. Okay, we both did. That's where we met. It is the only apostolic college in North America. There's one on every continent. We went to the one that's on North America. Okay, I took a class called Saints and Sinners: Histories of the Pope.
Yep.
Okay, I didn't take the second
Took the same
course.
class.
I took there's two semesters. I took the first semester, which is Jesus to like the middle, and then they have another one that's like the middle to present day. Dude, that class was freaking eye opening.
I got to take that class in Rome.
That's
That was
awesome.
awesome. But like you're saying, you have to question things. I remember in that class, we literally pulled up. We were every day we were out in the streets, right, seeing all the sights in Rome. We turned the corner, cobblestone road, of course, right, and there's a little shrine built into the wall. It's like a box, and I'm sure this is in like the tourist books and everything. And this little shrine had some odd little statues in it. And the professor goes, "You know what that is?" And he tells us the story of Pope Joan. And they're like, there was a pope who, during a parade through the city, gave birth to a kid on the
Yeah,
street. Like
yeah,
a pope hiding out who's a female and pregnant gives birth on the streets of Rome during a parade. Like that's just, but like anything you can imagine in history that sounds batshit crazy insane, it's not only true, but even worse things have happened. It's wild. Like I watch a Game of Thrones or something and I'm like, yeah, easily. Of course. Like, duh.
yeah.
This is probably tamed down from what the Middle Ages were really like.
Yeah, so I'm not like the most. I wouldn't say I'm like the most like all right rigid like Catholic. I think things are up to interpretation. I believe in something. I believe in whatever. Actually, kind of really like the ultimate grand reveal at the end,
Sure.
like this idea of Simon Peter, coming to this realization that oh yeah, like Jesus was a freaking awesome dude, and that's how everyone should live their life. Like I think ultimately, like that's what the Bible is, and then but I think that he even says it perfectly, right? I forget whose character says it, but if you think about it, right, the church is a man-made, like the church is built by man,
Sure.
run by man,
Yeah.
preserved by man. So it's inevitably going to have some
It's fallible,
right? So anyways, we don't want to get too religious on the podcast, but I just find it super intriguing, thinking about these kind of things, and really enjoy like the twist at the end.
No, I agree. And it's not only at the end. I thought it kind of rejuvenated the book when about a little more than halfway through, you realize the real story is that the resurrection may not have happened,
Right.
according to the character in this plot.
In this plot. Yeah.
Right. Set your personal beliefs aside. Two people who very devoutly believe it was a true event, but we're able to get into a book because that book is so compelling in the way it's presenting real source material that the author has found, but then playing with it and writing, like you said, that Gospel of Simon Peter. That was so cool because how many times have they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, other apocryphal stories, and other books written down? The Gospel according to Thomas is a real thing. So it's like, and there's tons of stories that didn't get accepted into the mainstream Bible that we know
There's a
today.
bunch of gospels that are Gnostic, right?
But as a historian, just don't write them off. Maybe some people in the church hierarchy for their prayer rituals and their compendium of literature ignore those. Imagine they don't exist. I understand that. But if you're a historian telling a tale, looking for a mystery of history, go into those documents, find the controversy, poke at it, and then add your own in. And he gives that disclaimer at the end that he wrote that text himself. Cool idea for if the resurrection didn't happen historically, why and how would his followers in that time period, post exile, pretty much on the run from the Romans and from the Jewish kingdoms, what would they need to do to spread their word and to basically change lives and change hearts and make an impact in the world? And they embellished a little bit, right? Like, that's not only very believable in many ways, but it's also probably true in other ways. So I really think that was awesome. And then here's how it just blends together perfectly with history. Somebody can come up with, what about the Shroud of Turin? And dude, Steve Barry goes into it. The Jacques
Yeah.
Molay, the
I had
final
no idea that
dude.
I remember watching the video about the shot trend.
Yeah.
I think that was before they had done all the testing on it. So again, this is another instance where I'm immediately Googling like the
I'm
shot
so
trend.
interested. So interested. And I want to see if all the new testing can basically prove this theory that the figure, exact dimensions of what we thought Jesus was like, and facial features and everything, and the embalming cloth could really have been the final Grand Master of the Knights Templar during the Inquisition. When he was killed, he was wrapped in these cloths. I wonder if that's possible. So Steve Barry found some sources, postulating it. And I heard there was new scientific evidence that you referenced in some articles about it more recently in the last few years. If that's true, that's so cool. And I don't think we'll ever know, but everything we maybe picture as Jesus and that we thought the Shroud of Turin proved might actually have been a Knights Templar from 1300 years later.
Which is also freaking awesome, right?
That's just a cool story. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this Templar treasure, it's like, it's not just a treasure hunt, because like there's documented records that these guys were at the Temple of Solomon. I think it was an 8 or 9 year period under Christian kings, King Baldwin IV in Jerusalem. They were living under the Temple Mount, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in all of Islam, is right now. And 700 years ago, these monk secret warrior knights were living under there, probably carving tunnels, digging tunnels. What did they find? I don't know. Could be
What's
anything.
crazy, I went to a bar in England that the Knights Templar like frequented. Like it's the oldest bar in England, and
sick.
from like the early, I guess, 1000s. So yeah,
You can make some cool cocktail names out of that.
yeah,
Great happy hour menu.
exactly.
Oh, speaking of another cool thing, Cassiopeia Vitt is building the castle. Dude, how cool is Cassiopeia's project to rebuild a 13th century castle using only materials, equipment, and techniques from that time period?
And the fact that they have to dress like they dressed back then, like that's
So
super cool. It's funny because like there's projects like that actually exist. So like that's super cool.
Yeah, completely. Like you said, Googling things. I even sent you a video I saw. I was watching YouTube videos on Guédillon, which is a castle in southern France where they're doing this. It was supposed to be like a 25-year project. I think it's going to be like 50 years now. And they even interview like some of the masons, and they were like known as specialists in stone, who were like these stone workers on modern day construction projects. And they took the job to just go live at this castle and use chisels and wedges and things and just break stone and put this castle together. And they'll be doing that for decades, like the rest of their life. That's
Hopefully they
just
get paid
wicked
like
cool.
modern wages though.
Hopefully, yeah. And modern healthcare, I hope. Well, actually, they said on the grounds is an herbalist who uses techniques from the area and uses native plants. Yeah, and so I'm sure they have medical infrastructure, but on the grounds they do have an herbalist who does use the native plants, and she even makes the paints out of them. Like they use her not only for that stuff, but also the coloring. Yeah, natural coloring and all the paintings.
Yeah, that's the other thing that was fascinating to me is the fact that, like a lot of historical places were painted at one point. Like we see a lot of, like even like in the Roman times, right? All these
the marble,
white marbles, right? We just imagine that Roman statues were white marble, but no, at the time they were actually painted. And now we have, what's really cool is they have this technology that can somehow recreate what it looked like when it was painted. And seeing some of those sculptures that we have are awesome.
Yeah. That's a great point, because like K-12 education growing up, you see all these pictures of old buildings and marble stones and statues, and just you think all these societies are just like so blah. But
Yeah.
no,
No,
it
it was
looked
super
totally
creative.
different.
Yeah.
It's like, did you ever see just on the internet when they take like photography or video from like turn of the century and they can colorize it? Like all these
Yes.
old videos we have, it's like crazy. Just that's what it looked like to people in real life. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's this book like got the mind going. It super fascinating. Great establishment of characters. The Cotton Malone guy he's I would read multiple books about him. I think his backstory is very intriguing. I want to know more about what he did in the Magellan Bullet,
Sure.
his relationship with Stephanie Nell.
Yep. Oh, that's gonna come. Don't worry.
But I want to bring this up. This has a 3.8 on Goodreads and only a 4.2 on Amazon, which are both very low.
I don't know what that's about, man. It's gotta be the religious backlash. You remember Da Vinci Code got harangued and Dan Brown took it left, right, and center. I feel like that's gotta be some religious fervor in the comments. And I don't think those scores at all reflect the craft of writing that is in this book, or that the author, that Steve Berry
Yeah,
is.
it must be the fact that he essentially is stating that Jesus did not rise from the dead. So, I mean,
Right. That's a big claim.
that is a pretty bold statement. But what's crazy, though, is that I'm a Catholic that believes that, and you are too, and we can read this book and enjoy it. Like,
And it's a damn good book.
it's a damn good book. Like, I don't get it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see this as some sort of outcry of blasphemy. Like, I realize it's a work of fiction, right? This guy is writing it. And he even says it at the very end. So,
Yeah. So all that, if those scores are low, what if we give it our own scores? And as we get into the scorecard here, we didn't talk too much action. I did want to walk through a little bit of the action scenes, and we can give our
there are
scores as
some.
well on that. But we got to go action and suspense here. And I think right from the jump, the way it kicks off, not only the torture scene with Imole, so we're going to a historical action scene, pretty cool. We also jump to that Copenhagen, obviously at the bookstore, right? Really cool. Cotton Malone is a bookseller now in retirement in Copenhagen. Hoybro's Plow. It's just so cool that our main character is a bookseller. It just gives it that little edge, an antique bookseller. But then the chase up that castle, that tower in Copenhagen, and how the assassin slits his throat and goes off the edge.
Kills himself. Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell? And we know the book is called The Templar Legacy. I'm just thinking that video game. What was that video game with the Templars? I think it might be called Assassin's Creed.
But yeah. The first Assassin's Creed.
Yeah. Just I'm getting images from that video game of this dude slitting his throat and going off that tower instead of getting caught. I just think that was a really cool double action opening.
Oh yeah, and even the scenes where Demolay corners them, and all of a sudden, boom, we have, which we eventually find out is Cassiopeia, shooting him with darts. We have multiple car chase sequences, multiple shootouts, and then ultimately at the very end in that underground layer below the church, we have the fight between Mark, and just the suspense is palpable through this entire story. I don't know, it's a solid 9 for sure, maybe even 9.
Solid 9 for me as well. Yeah, no, 9 for me. And I think plot is just as strong.
It's just as strong,
maybe stronger, because it's the plot that puts you at the edge of your seat. Like, he can write the scene real well, but if you don't care about why or the motivations behind it, I care about everything. And particularly things in the Abbey, the way they were developing, like we're developing these plot lines that come together so well, even before we knew Mark was the brother and Jeffrey, before we even knew those storylines came together, I was still just as interested in what's going on there. And the Master, the way the Master knew what was to come, how de Roquefort would take over, but Mark and Jeffrey had to challenge him, left Jeffrey this plan. Even that part of the plot, which you might see as a side story, I don't. I think it's a driver of the main story. they come together so perfectly. So I think plot, it's just singing. I will say the one area it gets muddied is all the puzzles, like you said, the 9 and the 7 and the cryptogram. And Saunière, I thought Saunière was so good how we're bridging, you know, the 12th and 13th centuries to the modern day. Well, we needed this guy in like the 1800s
Sure.
who was leaving clues, putting it together. He kind of got halfway there for Lars Nell to pick up on. So I thought everything was great. The Abbey, awesome plot going on there, internal politics of the brothers. Saunière and leaving clues and building this church and turning the pedestal upside down, finding the glass cylinder was really cool. And then all the stuff with Cotton and Stephanie on the trail and needing to figure this out. Plot worked for me. Also give it a 9.
I agree.
And then the reveal, not only the Mark Nell reveal, but the Jesus resurrection conspiracy reveal. I thought all those things were revealed just at the time where the reader needed a little hook.
Sure. Yeah, no, 100%. This book was executed perfectly.
Yeah. I think same with my buy-in, though, is I'm between a 4 and a 4.5 just because my Wang Ding is too many clues. Like, I think the stuff about Saunière was enough. We didn't need to go into like 4 other priests who then added their own clues and figured things out and then put people on a wild goose chase and like one too many little churches or castles that had a clue that, or the art piece. I will even say that. I didn't think the art piece fit as well. When they're looking for clues in like the background of this painting or something, the Caridad.
Oh, they have to go to they have to go to Avignon to the where the the all the anti-popes sat for a period of time, right?
I liked going there, but something about the painting and finding those clues just didn't gel for me. It's where
there was like one too many. It could have been tightened up a little bit.
Sure. I think that's the 4 out of 5.
Not that I didn't enjoy it, but like to make it to sort of like execute it perfectly, I truly think like something could have been trimmed a little bit, or maybe we could have got a little bit more time because everything we get with Saunière, I don't think we're ever physically with Saunière. Like we're only ever with. We go back to, the what is that? When does Jacques de Molay die? That's in the 12th or 11th century. 1100s, 1200s.
That was when they fell, so I think early 1300s.
Yeah,
I'm not mistaken.
So we obviously we see first person scenes from that, but we do see one scene where the Abbey comes and questions him.
Exactly.
Yeah. But if maybe if we could have seen more of his like him like finding something or him like putting something away or him talking to his mistress, like I would have like tied it together instead of just getting a lot of dump and exposition from like Cotton and or Torgerson or who was the other guy, the French guy that was in the institution for like 5 years.
The guy who was play acting as the incapacitated one.
Yeah.
Royce something.
Royce Clarendon. Yeah.
He was a little extra, that whole
maybe there was like one too many characters, like
I think you could have had the friend who he killed and also sent a letter to. The master sent a letter to him as well, who's a friend of Lars Nell.
Yeah.
Like would have been enough. You didn't also need then Royce or someone else. It could have been like, go find this person, and then they find this person and like somebody kills him. Like,
what did you think of the suicide of Mark's dad, Lars?
Yeah, interesting. And interesting that de Roquefort was there.
Right. But he obviously didn't do it. He just didn't prevent it.
Yes. Or at least that's what we're led to believe. Still possible he didn't do it. He didn't commit suicide. But we're led to believe he did. Yeah. I don't know. They did paint the picture of a tortured soul who kind of was at wit's end, kind of ran his course, and a wife he loved but doesn't support his work. I thought that was very impactful, the way Mark and Stephanie had to work things out, and they actually didn't come to a conclusion. It was kind of like one of those be okay with not being okay. Like they were able to come together, but I don't think they completely, like at one point Mark's like, I don't actually forgive you for not being present in my life. And I thought that was very visceral and real, the same way that Lars felt she doesn't understand my world and this thing that's so important to me. And I could see that driving him to the point of taking his life because she so vehemently didn't believe in the things that meant so much to him. So, yeah.
So the other thing I was confused about and why I'm pulling on buy-in is if Lars purchased this ruin with money from Torkelson, obviously he solved everything.
Why didn't he find it?
Yeah, why didn't he find it? That's what I'm like, so...
Was it that he didn't figure out the 9 and 7 piece?
That's why they figured out that there was something underneath the altar?
Mm-hmm. Or it could be he had the false cryptogram. He could have figured out the 9 and 7, but you remember in the cryptogram that was in his journal, it just led you to some statement that was like, it was the Templar motto or something.
He put that there on purpose.
We think he put that there on purpose.
We think he did, yeah.
Either he didn't figure out the 9 and the 7, so he didn't have the clue to unlock it, or he had the wrong cryptogram, which, a little murky. I don't know why he didn't finish the job.
Or he wasn't physically able to like push that stone off the altar, like
possible.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what confused me the most. The fact that he got all the way there, he knew that this place was important. Obviously, searched it.
Yeah,
up and down.
He just didn't find that final clue.
But I mean, again, it's it's definitely picking nits. It's yeah. So I'm going to 4.
I think a 4 is fair. I think we found so many nits you could go lower, but that doesn't reflect when you're reading the book how interested you are. You're not thinking through all these little foibles.
Bad guys.
I think there's, you know what? I might have to find half a point here. I want to go near perfect on the villain, 5 out of 5. I think my half point though is going to be how many times they were trailing the team and just holding and not taking them or not. And now looking back, I'm kind of like, they wanted them to do the heavy lifting. They needed them to put together the clues and they would just be there to clean up the mess. So I just thought one too many times DeRoquefort told his people to hold or not go in or tail them, but don't go after them. And they were like, oh, we're safe here. The lookouts are on the outside. We know they're there, but they're not coming to get us. That happened.
He definitely was overconfident. He definitely thought that he had. Very much reminded me of Sean Bean from The National Treasure.
Yeah.
Like someone who's just as smart as Nicolas Cage, but is just one step behind.
Yeah. He needs others to do the heavy lifting.
He knew most of it. He had like access to most of it, but he just couldn't quite piece it together. But yeah, you're right. Like it was interesting how there were situations where they could have been way more forceful, and maybe that's just we're supposed to take that as a demeanor of the Knights Templar, like how they act in the shadows, kind of thing.
Yeah, he can't tell his guys to go after other brothers and innocent Christians, very harshly. He can't direct them to do that.
I did like how vulnerable Barry makes him, in the sense that he's constantly we're in his head and he's constantly thinking about like how things that he's doing to do is going to affect how he looks to the Brotherhood, and ultimately, that leads to his downfall, right? With the cleric, coming essentially and dispatching
the chaplain.
The chaplain, yeah,
great hero.
Yeah, and so it's interesting how this guy who ultimately himself is his downfall, right? Yeah. He's the reason for his downfall, but he kind of knows it the entire time. It's very intriguing.
He's almost duped himself. He's coming on with the strongman mentality when he kind of secretly knows it's a little overbearing and he's manipulating others and he wants this thing so badly he could taste it. He's saying he's a man of the code and he's going to live by the rule, But then there's so many times he's explaining
He's not
why
following the
he's
rule.
going to break the rule. He goes,
Yeah.
I can do it for this because this is just so important. And like, that's how evil is perpetrated at the highest levels very often by, the really bad guys of history. And he's doing that every step of the way. He's justifying to himself, and ends justify the means, he keeps telling himself. You know what? I'm going to go 5 out of 5 because he's such a good character. And I keep coming back to the scenes at the Abbey. And one, which could help on action as well, we didn't mention, the escape from the Abbey. When Jeffrey,
that was a cool escape.
When Jeffrey reveals the master had a plan, there's back doors, and one point they even run through, I think it's like the kitchen or where maybe a dining room where all the other brothers are eating, and they all just kind of look at them, and they're very clearly supposed to be in captivity, but here they are walking through, but nobody's going to stop them, like, because they are so popular. Yeah, I thought the political dynamics inside the Abbey helps the villain a lot. So I'm going to go 5 out of 5 on villain.
So, I guess speaking of Jeffrey, speaking of good guys, what did you think? My biggest hang-up is like, what did you think of Jeffrey's like final turn / not turn at the very end? Like, boom. I believe that he was going to turn back. Like, I always had this like weird suspicion about him. And then when we get Torkelson saying, "Oh wait, he wasn't actually a traitor."
Yeah,
like
he did save the day by calling the chaplain.
Yeah, he did.
So, right, the whole time you're led to believe this guy was the hero when he broke Mark out of captivity. But then he's questionable. Like, Cassiopeia's looking at him weird at one point. Stephanie Nell's a little uncomfortable with him. But Mark vouches for him and what he did to save him and how close he was with the original master. Here's how I read Jeffrey. He's the true believer. And he's the true believer who's not just going to say the rule only is applicable when it suits you and your aims. The rule is immutable. And so his grandmaster, de Roquefort, was in charge. The rule was followed. The conclave, the brothers voted him in. He had the authority. And I think Jeffrey, as the true believer, is the antithesis of a de Roquefort who uses that code to his advantage and can play loose with it. As the true believer, he had to do this. It was the code. It was the rule. It was for the Brotherhood and the oath that he took. He couldn't break the oath that he took. And I even think the master set up all this not wanting him to break his oath, knowing you need somebody with that integrity. But he's not breaking the oath if he also tells the chaplain, knowing the chaplain is a good guy who's probably going to have his qualms. What the master did to Jeffrey is like what Jeffrey did for the chaplain. He was like planting him, and he called him at the last minute, got him to save the day. And at the same time, he didn't violate his oath. So I read Jeffrey as a very compelling character, the true believer. When the true believer's on your side, there's nothing better. Right. When the true believer is against you, because he has to be, because there's black and white, there's right and wrong, that's not good. And I thought he found a way out of it. He found the both and solution out of that.
No, I like that. I like that. You convinced me.
It takes some work to get there, but that I think is the read that I'm satisfied with.
Dude, I love Jeffrey.
Good character.
I like Stephanie Nell. I love Cassiopeia. I really like Torkelson. Malone, super intriguing character. I picked up on this thing. I texted you. I was like, have you noticed like Cotton constantly like eyeing up food? And you're like, I don't really pick. So it is a thing. And I want, in the next, if we read another book, I want you to like have that in mind, because there's multiple times where he's like, boom, he walks into a place and he eyes like a cake. It's very subtle. He's like, ooh. And essentially you're supposed to take it to mean like, damn, I would like a piece of that cake. Okay. It was when we go to like Torkelson's house and he's like, and at one point he's like, I'm just going to go over here and slice a piece of cake. Yeah. And there's another time where
they had the rabbit.
He's like, he's in the market, right? Where they end up talking to like some lady that he buys a bunch of books from, the dumps in the trash can.
That's right.
Before he goes to that lady, he eyes up like this street vendor that has rotisserie chicken with potatoes, and he like mentions like, oh, I'm really hungry right now.
I got to look for that.
I think it's like a very, very subtle thing, similar to like the whole funk stuff. But that was even at the time
Yep.
like would hit you over the head. This is if we get to interview Steve Barry, that would be my number one question to ask him. Like, is that on purpose, or am I like just out of bounds, like thinking about this kind of stuff?
We know he's good friends with Brad Thor, so that's just another similarity between the two. Because Brad Thor
Yeah.
always has the food. Usually it's Nicholas, the troll, who's cooking, Scott, who's happy to eat it. But there's always a food scene. So yeah, if Cotton Malone starts listening to funk, then the similarities between Brad Thor and Steve Barry is too much. It's too uncanny.
Did we just read a Scot Harvath book where he's reading a Cotton Malone book?
So they put each other in one book, and they told each other they were going to do that. They're like, hey, in our next release in this year, we'll put them in each other. And it's different, though, from like a Jack Carr, where a character's just reading a story, or like, oh, I'm reading a Mitch Rapp book. They actually had the individual person in the universe. Like Cotton Malone was a person in the Magellan billet that Scott ran into or crossed paths at some point. And then we'll see which Steve Barry book it is, but I remember Scot Harvath showed up in one, and I was like, I lost my mind. But Brad Thor did say in one of our interviews that he and Steve Barry did that on purpose.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, good guys. What are you giving? I'm giving a 4.5.
4.5. Yep, give me that as well. Yeah, I want to go perfect. Almost too much of a good thing, let's say. Setting, nothing but a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be a 5.
Were you just transported to the south of France this whole day?
I was.
The Languedoc. Yeah,
I was. Hey, like I've never been there, but when I'm looking at pictures of it, that's what popped in my mind.
I could smell it. I could taste it. I could see it. I could feel it. I had the textures of the meadows with this castle, and we're on the road. I know exactly what I'm looking out the windows. It was so well done. Incredibly well done. Inside the Abbey too. Oh, I would love to see something like that. Oh, making me think of, I just watched Conclave.
Oh, great movie. Great movie.
Oh, good movie.
Good movie?
Good-ish movie to me.
Okay. All right.
But one thing I was going to say, you feel like you're in the halls. I felt like I was in the Abbey. Like, obviously Conclave is more of a modern one, in the papal apartments. They were kind of like drab and dull. But the way they're moving through the chambers and the hallways, I could see that in this dimly lit stone abbey building, medieval castle. Really cool. But one other thing, like you said, Mark Nell's accent, being an American when everyone else around him was very French. I felt like Stanley Tucci took me out of the movie in Conclave.
But he's an American Cardinal.
I knew he was an American Cardinal, but they could have played that up so much more to remind you of it. Like, he was the American. There might be an American Pope. He's progressive. They could have called him the American. Some of the other popes could have had a nickname, or cardinals could have had a nickname for him. Instead, he'd just be talking to all these very internationally minded people, and all of a sudden drop a super American accent. It just took me out of it one too many times.
They should have had him speak Italian.
Well, that's what I was going to say,
because
I know
you bought into Ray Fiennes.
Yes,
as a British cardinal,
100%.
When he's speaking Italian like fluently to everybody, right?
Yep. If Tucci had one or two scenes where he spoke Italian or French or just anything to any of the other
Tucci can speak Italian, like that's the problem.
I know he knows a bit of Italian from the cooking show. You watch the cooking show?
Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah. I don't think his Italian's so great, but he does have some.
But if they told him to do it, he would have
he
learned it. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. I just thought if he dropped a couple of lines, or he was involved more in the conversations that were in other languages, it would have made the movie more realistic. He was the one guy who took me out of it. So
interesting. Okay.
It made me think of that with Mark Nell being this American brother in this society.
True.
Yeah, at such a high position of power too.
All right, 5 out of 5 on setting. Free space. Who's your free space going?
Oh God, I can go so many directions. Let me hear from you. What are you going with?
I'm gonna go Cotton. I freaking I love this introduction of his character. He's not like super overbearing in this story. You know, it's kind of like I mean, I guess he's quote unquote, this is his series, like he's the protagonist, but he perfectly blends into the background when he needs to be. You know, it's not forced. I really love his introduction. I think it's a great way to introduce this intriguing, intelligent character. You know, his use is perfect. Obviously, he's at the very end, right? He wants to be the guy that, you know, he actually cares at the end because he wants to figure out what he is. You know, this is a guy he's like an Indiana Jones type character. I don't know. I'm super excited to read another Cotton.
I'm so glad to hear that, because the second I knew you were the history guy and Scot Harvath, you love those little history nuggets. It's like, dude, we got to get you into some Steve Berry. And so the fact that you're clicking with Cotton Malone this early makes me very happy. So I want to go for my winner because of things to come. I want to go Cassiopeia.
Okay.
I want to go her and the castle project that they're building, but I don't think I can in this book. So that's my winner for the series of what's to come. She's just the best. For this book, though, I think I'm going to go the Abbey. Just time spent in the Abbey with the brothers was so much fun. The way it was painted, like I just said, but also the dynamics between them, I just thought were great scenes. Anytime we cut to them, like the chapters start with the location. Whenever it said Abbey de Fontaine, I was like, yes, I wanted to be there. So well done. It is, but it's got to be based on so many.
No, it was like a conglomerate of like a couple different places.
Yeah. Dude.
All right, so we come to the covers.
That's the final hump.
All right,
they're good.
To be honest with you, not in love with these covers.
They're good, not great.
I don't know if I'm just on like thriller mode covers. Like, do I need to readjust my cover game for, you know, some other kind of genre? Yeah, and the last couple Scot Harvath ones we talked about were amazing. The OG one
is probably the best one.
I would have to say so.
Although, because I just talked up the Abbey, E is exactly what I'm picturing.
I actually really like F with the sword. And like this ruin type thing, like Los Caballeros de Salomon.
Yeah. I wish we saw a little bit more of the Templars in Jerusalem. That's one time period of history I would have liked to go to in the book a bit more.
Didn't go to there really at all.
Yeah, being the Temple of Solomon, the Brothers of Solomon, how they got that name. What I want to see more of, like when we went to Demolay and like maybe right before that happened, the Purge, right, where the order was wiped out. Maybe a little bit more time with them right before, like in history, right before or as that was happening. You know, we hear about them moving the treasure through the Pyrenees on horseback,
right?
And these carriages kind of disappeared, and no one knows where they've never been seen again. So cool. I would have liked page time back then in those days. Yeah, F captures some of that. We get to see the Fat Templar. In A, we're looking at a little bit of the Templar. Cover G, they actually have the whole. It must be a famous painting, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
of a Templar.
I'm assuming that is. Yeah,
probably a Grandmaster.
And the other three all just we have the Templar cross, in like the sea is in the sky with some sort of Middle Eastern French city.
Yeah.
Some near the Mediterranean. D is interesting with this iron mask guy.
D's pretty sweet, actually.
It's intriguing for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty cool design.
These are red eyes that leads out to like a forest type thing. What is that language? Templarski Devicti? Is it like
Czech
Polish?
or something?
Czech?
Yeah, something Eastern European. And then H has the chainmail, another cool touch, reminding you of the Templar. I do like how a lot of them have the Templar cross. A, going back to the OG, it does have kind of the burnt edges. The page has kind of like that old parchment. Also a nice touch. Yeah, I think if I'm going to give it to one, though, I think I'm going E. Just because I like the setting so much in these old castles and these crypts.
All right.
That's probably my favorite. What do you say? OG?
I like G. I like G, the
Go
fat.
G.
I like the little bit
Fat
of
Templar.
the fat Templar. It's interesting. It's great.
That's so
These
funny.
guys that had huge old beards were
Yeah.
just chilling.
Sitting on all this wealth and this treasure.
I don't know. I think they're a solid like 3.5.
Yeah, 3.5. Put me down 3.5.
3.5. Okay.
Yeah, it's fair. A and E could be pushing for a 4, but it's just not that close. Yeah. All right.
All right. So we're half a point off. So what do we got?
45 for me, I think.
45 for you, and then a 44.5 for me.
Yeah. It's awesome.
All right. Solid book.
Yeah,
Super
solid book. It's not Steve Berry's first book. He wrote a couple of standalones, one of which, by the way, Chris, we absolutely have to read.
Okay.
We have to read The Third Secret.
Third Secret. Oh, what is the Third Secret about?
It's about one of the Marian apparitions. I forget if it's Fatima or Medjugorje, but it's about one of the Marian apparitions and this little girl who sees her, and holy smokes, I remember that book being life-changing.
Cool.
We might have to go back to that. And since you're a Cotton Malone fan, you ready to do some more Cotton Malone down the road?
Oh, for sure. Let's throw one of these in, because it's nice that they're just like, we can come to them whenever we want. Right.
I was going to say that. Yes, the series has an arc. Scot Harvath, Mitch Rapp, I was very interested in the arc. With Cotton Malone, it's almost mystery, history, adventure of the year. And you can pop around. Yes, we're going to learn things about his son, Gary. We're going to learn things about his relationship with Stephanie Nell and his work in the Magellan Billet. We're going to learn about Cassiopeia, Henrik Thorvaldsen. So there's a lot of arc to go on. But what makes this series a standout is these nuggets from history, how you're dropped into them, and they're so immersive and driving a plot that's really gripping. So I think it's a series where we could just pop around. If a plot sounds interesting to you, or a historical time period sounds interesting, read that one. You know, going in order has its benefits. We've done Mitch Rapp, we've done Scot Harvath. This is one series where just skip around and have fun, man.
Sounds good to me.
So Third Secret we got to do, and then we'll pick another Steve Berry just based on what sounds awesome. Chris's choice.
What are we covering next on the pod, though, Mike?
Next, though, so we're not tied to a series, so we're going to be jumping around. We're going to go back to Andrews and Wilson.
Okay.
Dark Rising came out in April, a new release. Yep. And we're going to kick off Dark Intercept. So next book is Dark Intercept, the first in the Shepherd series. Another series I can introduce you to, Chris. You haven't read that one
never read it before. Yeah.
And that's in hopes of, in the near future, getting to Dark Rising. So we'll probably do Dark Intercept and Dark Rising next. Little 1-2 punch.
Cool.
After that, we have our basically June, July, August, and September new release schedule. That's when we start getting.
Do you see that? Whatchamacallit got pushed back, though?
Yeah, James
Reese.
Jack Carr. We're hoping to have that in June. We're going to now have to wait for Cry Havoc in October. So gives us a little wiggle room, though. It opens up our summer a little bit. Yeah. So we'll basically be doing new releases over the next couple of months, but we're going to do Dark Intercept next.
All right. Well, we need to thank our patrons. Our Deputy Director, Sherry F., our Special Operator, Jason C., our Special Agents, Ben, Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Dawn, Peggy, Chris, and Mark. Please subscribe to No Limits, the Thriller Podcast. You can also find us on our previous 2 feeds, No Limits, the Thriller Podcast, or No Limits, the Scot Harvath Podcast, or No Limits, the Mitch Rapp Podcast. And as always, just like cotton, be cotton.